Great. So welcome, everyone. This is our AMA with Adam Shostack, the second of a series of Lord knows how many. Agenda, we're going to have a little intro for the unaware, people who apparently, there are still some of those that don't know Adam. So we're going to talk a bit about who he is and why he's here. Then we are going to address some questions that were sent before the event. And at the end, we're going to open the forum to anything that pops up during his answers. So, Adam. I first met Adam 1990-something, a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And by then, he was the leader of a small band of rebels called Ring Zero. It was a lot of fun. And the first thing that impressed me, the first of the many things that impressed me with Adam was the clarity that he could take the most complex stuff and just sum it down to its skeleton and get people to actually understand that and be able to use it. So since then, to me, he is a Jedi Master. He's basically synonymous with threat modeling. I personally consider him the Richard Feynman of threat modeling. The way that he put together the 4 questions and drew that backbone that everybody is riding on since. He is also the author of the Source Code Review Guidelines, 1996, one of the first guides on how to actually do security review in source code. He is now the president of Shostack and Associates, consulting, training, all good stuff. He led the design and the delivery of the Microsoft Threat Modeling Tool version 3. He's also a game designer, having influenced Ctrl-Alt-Hack and created Elevation of Privilege. He's a pioneer of CVE, something that not a lot of people know. He's an emeritus member of the advisory board. Back in the day, he published a paper called The Taxonomy for Security Bugs, I think it was. And I believe that that was one of the first ones that brought the idea of, hey, we have to put this thing together and people have to understand this thing in a way that everybody can use the same language to talk about this stuff. He is the author of many books, video, and training. He wrote Threat Modeling Designing for Security, the Bible for Threat Modeling, and perhaps a bit less known work, but no more important, The New School of Information Security, which is a really good read if you haven't yet. He has written an inordinate amount of papers that makes anybody think how much time this guy has in his hands. And he is a co-author of the Threat Modeling Manifesto. He is heavily involved in collaborative efforts around, and the keyword here is collaborative. Adam is one of the biggest proponents of, hey, people, let's work together to get the shit better. He works in the areas of privacy, cyber incident shared lesson learning, security education, great training available on LinkedIn, go check it out. And he's constantly cooking something new. The last thing in the pipe is threats, what every engineer should learn from Star Wars. With that, and you guys have no idea how many times I had to make the font smaller so that everything would go into one slide, we move to the questions that we had. So the first one, and since we are short on time, actually, before we go there, Dennis, I think that you said that you had some questions and then you had to move, right? Is Dennis still here? No. Okay. So our first question, why Star Wars and not Star Trek?
So let me start out by saying that Star Trek is better written than Star Wars. And the reason that I use Star Wars is twofold. First, the technology actually matters. The plans on a stolen backup tape, the plugging into the Death Star, there's scene after scene in which the technology does something. And because Star Trek is so focused on the human elements, right? What are the people feeling? Why are they doing these things? What's the relationship between aliens and humans? The writers will just write tech, tech, tech. and they'll substitute in, the ions have become depolarized, and so blah, blah, blah. And so the tech doesn't matter to the story in the same way, right? In Star Trek, something broke, the ship doesn't move, or the ship is trapped somewhere, or whatever it is not really a result of the technology. It's a result of the needs of the plot. The second thing is there's 3 core Star Wars movies, and there's an explosion of stuff around it, but everyone has seen those 3 core movies. And so if I say stolen battle station plans, people know what I'm talking about. Or you remember that episode in which Data was turning on a program to allow him to have nightmares, and it turned out that the interphasic systems were... No, you don't remember that episode. So now I'm teaching you this thing which you don't care about in order to make a point which isn't going to resonate because you don't remember the episode. And so it is the needs of the teaching that really drives me to Star Wars.
So basically that means that we are never going to learn if doors going whoosh is part of the threat model of access to the Enterprise or not. That's basically what you're telling us. Okay, cool.
It's true. It's true.
It's interesting how you put it that in one of them, it's the human element. In the other one, if I follow you correctly, tech is almost a persona by itself in the story. It brings the story along in a way that it wouldn't in Star Trek.
Yeah.
Nice, nice. So perhaps when we talk about privacy, then we have to go and look at Star Trek because it's more of the human element.
Possibly. Or the world is just full of good, bad privacy stories.
We are not missing those.
So.
Okay, the next one. How do you find your next thing of interest? You have covered such a swath of things in security. How do you decide what's the next one?
So that's a really good question, which I've only recently started getting intentional about. The thing which I have been doing for a very long time is to try to understand why a problem is a problem. And so, for example, when we were working together in the 90s, building vulnerability databases, you went out, you searched on, some PHP issue, and trying to decide if they were the same was a really difficult problem that you and I spent way too many hours dealing with. And so when I met Dave Mann, Steve Christie, who are really the founders of the CVA, and they were talking about this system for a database, a concordance between things, it was solving a problem that was in front of me and trying to do it in a way that wasn't only solving the surface problem. And so figuring out where there's a crux that you can really grasp and break or move things, where's the lever, is important. And a few years back, I saw this, well, actually, technically, I read this talk by a fellow named Richard Hamming of Hamming Weights, if you're familiar with the history of early computing. So anyway, Hamming, early pioneer, has things named after him, has a talk entitled...
Oh, Hamming Code? That guy?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He's got a talk titled You and Your Research. And it's focused on research, but what he says is, if you want to do Nobel Prize quality work, here are the habits you should develop.
Okay.
You should know what the important problems are. You should have a couple that you care about. You should spend your time talking to people about those problems. And my version of this these days, going back to 1996 when I got started in application security, there's always been the question of, do we need to fix this? When we threat model, do I need to fix this? How do I prioritize between these? And these tie to the question of what is really going wrong in the world. This was a theme in the New School book. This is a theme when we threat model. This is the motivator behind my work in near miss reporting and in NTSB for cyber. All of these they're facets of the same gem, which is that if we can get insight into what is going wrong in the world, we can do a better job of solving it. Right? And even if we can't do a better job at solving it, we can at least assess how much worse it's getting.
Mm-hmm.
But, for example, here's a simple question. How many accounts were taken over yesterday? Right.
Nope.
we know, and I don't want to get into, a lot of people want to get political about this, but I don't. We know how many people were admitted to the hospital with COVID, a week ago.
Mm-hmm.
We could assess the causes of death relative to one another in the United States or in most major developed countries. We can't do the same thing with regards to how are computers getting broken into. I've seen in the last week people who claim it's 80% human error and it's 80% programming errors. And while I'm willing to believe that 160% of break-ins happened last week, no, I'm not. Right? These things ought to sum up to 100%, give or take, methodological whatevers. But we don't even have those numbers. And so if I want to make a distinction between, do we focus on human factors or do we focus on programming errors? I lack data to underlie my argument. That's what I mean to say. And so to go to the question, I find my next thing of interest because I think it's going to matter.
Cool. Okay. And
that was a very long answer when I could have said the thing I said at the
end. But there was a lot of interesting material there. Like now I'm going to go and watch the Humming presentation. No two ways about it. But let's put a pin on that thing of the not knowing the numbers, because I think that we have another question that gets close to that. So the next one that we have is, when do you know that people are getting your training? How do you know that the message that you're passing to them is clicking? You do a lot of training. I think that on Black Hat now you're going to be training as well, right?
Yep.
And you get people from all sorts. How do you know that you're reaching them?
So the simplest answer is because they tell me.
They're the best judges.
Right? Where they say that that really makes a lot of sense. The other thing that we do in a lot of our trainings now is we can look at the answers that people give us. We've moved to a pandemic sort of system where we have a couple of hours of live class and a couple hours of homework. And so we can sit and we can look at the homework and we can say, this person understands this, this, and this, and they're missing that. And let me tell you, I'm a bad student. I don't learn well.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. A lot of smart people I talk to have this problem of they were smart enough that things just clicked, and so they never had to learn learning skills.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've had to study what should training look like. And so we have explicit learning goals, and we can compare, what do the answers look like on day one of the training versus what do they look like on day 4 or day 5?
That's a bit of the formal bit of education, right? I have this question and I'm expecting these answers in this form or some variation of that.
Yeah.
But look at what the person asked here. When do you know that the message is clicking? So when do you get something from people that you go, oh, this person all of a sudden understands what threat modeling is about. They understand what I'm trying to tell them. What's the sign for you in a student that all of a sudden they saw the way?
So I'm going to answer your question in just a second.
For sure.
But I think we have, and I appreciate your kind words about this, but I think we have this belief that threat modeling is a Jedi thing.
We used to, yeah.
But I don't want threat modeling to be a Jedi thing.
True.
Actually, can I share my screen for a second?
Please do.
Okay. Hang on, let me just pull something up. And let me share this. So how many Jedi do you see in this picture?
Well, you don't know.
Well, we do know. We do know. There are no Jedi in this picture, and it's a trick question. If you were answering one,
I know.
Luke Skywalker over here is not yet a Jedi. He hasn't.
He's not yet. No.
But the whole point of that little game is that to destroy the Death Star, we need lots of engineers. We need lots of people with different skills. And so I think more important than someone having the aha moment is that they know how to fix the car. They can apply the skills that they need in the moment. And this ties to something you taught me, right? Which is the threat model every story, right? If every single person needs to go through the aha and the hosannas and the light shines down from above, we're never going to get to threat model every story.
True.
So how do I know it's clicking? Let me give you an honest answer. Sometimes people will tell me. Usually it's a month later, people will send me an email and they will say, I was in this meeting and I was listening to someone do it wrong. And I was able to both identify what the problem was and say something that I learned in training that just shifted the tenor of the meeting or shifted our ability to collaborate. And it's after the training. It's when people are really doing the work that the click becomes visible.
Okay.
And sometimes it doesn't click for 3 months after the training, and then it just sort of all slots into place. And I wish I could do, and I know they have the skills. I wish I could accelerate that clicking pattern. And it's, as long as they can draw DFD, remember what stride stands for and apply it in a stride per element sort of way, they may be going through the motions. I go through the motions with Git, right? I don't know how to use Git. But I can do enough Git to cause myself harm. And if that's the threat, if someone comes out of my training able to do threat modeling like I do Git, I'm happy because that's enough for them to do their job.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Knowing more than 3 commands and rebuilding the directory when something fails.
And knowing that, oh shit, Git is a website.
Totally. Okay. So now going back to that thing about the sharing. So you're a big proponent of public disclosure by companies. You have the NTSB for events and all that. What's the big obstacle to getting that? Why aren't people jumping into it?
Lawyers.
Really?
Yeah. And so by the way, let me just clarify the question for people who have not been talking to me for years.
Yeah,
We're talking about public disclosure of security incidents that companies have had. I mean, the shortest answer you're going to get out of me in this session, because it was a single word. But really, companies are concerned that disclosing a breach is going to get them sued. And so their lawyers will say nothing.
But we are starting to see legislation telling people you have to whenever you have a breach.
We've had that legislation for 15 years, more, 20 years.
So don't those two things go head to head at some point? You have to let people know, you don't want to?
I've been in meetings where the lawyer says, who's going to find out?
But if they do, the impact is huge. So can they take the risk?
A lot of times companies are willing to say, we won't disclose it,
And can't we get to a situation where we anonymize that data set enough that we still get some information out of it and they don't get liability out of it?
So maybe. We may get to a situation in which we see reports from regulated industries, right? So we may have sectoral rules. And we're seeing this now. There's places where you have to notify CISA within an hour, the American Cybersecurity Infrastructure and something agency. But the other approach that I think may be more powerful is, again, following aviation, but learning from near misses. Because a near miss where one control worked and another one failed is a success story.
Yep.
And in aviation, there's a form, you can send it to NASA if you've had a near miss, and it's treated as evidence of constructive engagement, which lawyers care a lot about, if the regulators come after you. And so I think that may be a better model for learning, because by the time you're done anonymizing the data, you may be losing a lot of, maybe company culture plays a big role. I believe it probably does. But if we remove the name of the company, I can't assess their culture except in the way that the anonymizer is sharing. That was an ugly sentence, but I hope it made sense.
It did. Okay, just to remind everyone that the chat is open. If you have any questions, you can put it in there, and we're going to address them later. Next one. Okay, so going to the practicalities of it. We talk a lot about implementing security by design. What do you say are the milestones of a successful adoption of security by design? How do you know that you actually got there?
So, two answers. One is the question, who delivers what to whom when? If you can't answer that question crisply, you're not there, right? I can tell you, for some of the folks that I work with, they require a +1 on Git for this sort of thing, and they require that it's passed SemGrep for that sort of thing, et cetera, et cetera. So if you can't tell me what it takes to what the deliverables are, who's looking at those deliverables, when they have to see them, that's a key milestone. And figuring that out is time consuming. It involves culture change. And boy, we're going through a lot of change in the world right now. No one has change energy left over at the end of, are we returning to office? Is this thing in person? And so it's a challenge to drive any additional change, but it aligns with a bunch of the things we need to do to work remotely, which is super helpful. The second milestone is it's in your job ladders. In order to be promoted to a principal engineer, I'll go back a job for you here at Autodesk, you need to have led a threat modeling effort and had your threat modeling work signed off on by a peer.
Interesting. That's a change in behavior that most people would probably be willing to do.
So there are companies that I know of that do it. And it just clarifies everything, right? Because if you don't know what a good threat model looks like here at name of company, then what's the promotion criteria? And let me tell you, people are not happy when their promotion criteria are messy or unclear.
Been there, not done that.
So, and let me give you an earlier milestone. You've done some pilots, you are asking the 4 questions, you are recording your answers, you're getting training. Those things are a starting milestone. And I like to also look at the later ones, right? When do we really have it baked into adoption? When is it the thing that we do and we can't imagine doing without?
Yep. When you bake in. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, the next one that we have. Oh, this is one of those. Okay. So if an executive came to you and said that they needed to implement an A to Z security program in the organization, what would you anchor that program on? What do you think is the most fundamental base of a security program?
Why?
Why not?
No, why? Why do we need to implement an A to Z security program? Because that's going to drive my answer. For example, one reason is because we ship medical devices, and the FDA tells us in order for a medical device to be considered safe and effective, you have to meet the 47 pages in the latest draft cyber pre-market guidance. Sorry, that was a mouthful. Forthcoming regulation. And so the A to Z program that I'm going to implement for that exec is going to be different than the A to Z program I'm going to implement for, say, a pipeline executive, because freaking Transportation Safety Administration issued cyber regulations. Okay. But the question of why do we need to do this is the first anchor. The second anchor is threat modeling, right? What are we working on here at the Acme company? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? Did we do a good job? We can ask those questions at company-wide scale. And if we're not asking those questions, then what we're doing is we're grabbing a control catalog, saying NIST CSF or 853 or 27001, and we're throwing controls at the wall to see what sticks. So what's the motivator for doing it? And then threat modeling in a way at a level which can be pretty lightweight around what do we do? What are we doing here? What we're working on. Threat modeling for a company includes our value prop, and it involves our IT operational stuff, all the desktops, all the phones, all the HVACs that the company needs to run. You've got to think about both of those things and ask what can go wrong with this. And then you mush them together a little bit. But those two are my base. Why and then threat model.
In a bit of, for those who are joining us now, way of putting it, would you say that having a good enough threat model that explains the 4 questions, that reaches for the 4 questions, what are we building? What can go wrong? What can we do about it? Have we done a good job? Would you say that that's enough of a spine to hang other AppSec activities on with a higher degree of success? For example, building your test plan. You will base it on the findings the assumptions in your threat model, and make sure that actually those things that you promised, hey, I'm going to have these controls in place, are actually effective.
Yep.
Or documentation. Hey, I'm going to write these things in my security guide. Things like that.
So there's a bunch of things where we know the answer to what can go wrong, even before we've asked what we're working on.
True.
You know, the OWASP top 10 is a set of answers. So we don't necessarily have to vulcanize our own rubber in order to do this. But if you can't tie something in your control catalog to a threat that you care about, what are you doing?
Idle work. Yep. True. Nice. Next one that we have. What should developers absolutely know about secure design? How do we best use their limited time and resources?
This is a great question. Thank you to whoever put this in. And I hate to say this because it's going to sound like I'm pitching stuff, but it's not. This is actually the question I am struggling with in my next book. A couple of days ago, I took out 5 pages of text about how to securely store a password, right? Many of us in security learned a lot by getting an understanding of what a salted iterated hash is, because you have to know a bunch of things to understand why that matters. What developers should know is use a modern framework that has a store password function.
Yep, a good one.
And so I'm saving them 5 pages of reading. And the reason that I love this question so much is because, and I don't mean this as a critique, by the way, I go to OWASP to find like the cross-site scripting cheat sheet, and it doesn't fit on a wallet card. It doesn't fit on one sheet of paper. It doesn't help me cheat when I'm trying to remember how to write a modern cross-site scripting attack.
It's a cheat book, yeah.
And yeah, it's a cheat book, which is fine, right? There's a place for that. But if I'm a developer and I want it, and someone tells me I should know about cross-site scripting, then I have, where's the resource? How do I use their time and resources? So I think the answer to this question is they should know STRIDE, spoofing, tampering, repudiation, info disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. 6 important threats. They should know about predictability as a threat, and they should know about parsers, that parsers often sit at trust boundaries. And if they know those things, they're doing pretty well.
And privacy. Putting it as different from confidentiality?
Yeah, privacy. I believe privacy is really important.
But not something that they need to absolutely know going zero at it.
Yes. Knowing, even understanding what privacy means can be complicated. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so, you know, if the answer to this question is you're going to take my course at the University of Washington, I get 10 weeks, 3 hours a week plus homework. That's a different sort of thing than if you're going to take my 45-minute course on LinkedIn, right? And so how do we get 45 minutes? I believe that STRIDE, predictability, and parsing as a set of threats are comprehensible. They give you things into which you can dig. And they help you avoid categories of errors in a way that teaching them about SQL injection doesn't. Mm-hmm. But if I tell you that SQL injection is a result of parsing issues, yep, then maybe the cubbyholes start to work.
Yep. It's a good first layer for the onion. Yep.
Love the question. Thank you.
Okay, the next one we have. How do you develop people in order to protect an organization? What are the values that you work on? What are you looking for in the people that you are training to be the leaders of an organization in their security?
That's a different question. I train people to come through the door.
The last was my interpretation.
No, but so I believe that the first thing that people need, and you know, I don't mean to sound like a broken record here, but I really do believe that a little bit of threat modeling is very important. And it's why I've been working on it just for the last 15 years, is because I really do believe that the leverage that we get from those 4 simple questions, from the techniques we use to answer them, is enormous. Right? It's a little bit like start with the why. Why do I need you to do this? Well, here's the threat. And here's how it connects to the business that we're in. So I really need you to do this. So we need to develop the frameworks that help them do their jobs. And we need to develop an appreciation and value of inclusiveness, of respect, of compassion. People from different backgrounds think about problems differently. And so being inclusive, which I think has some moral value to it, I'm not going to attempt to convince you it has moral value. I'm going to say that you can recruit from a larger pool of people. You will get better answers to your questions. This is scientifically proven, by the way, is that more diverse groups come up with better answers slightly more slowly. This is a consistent scientific result. But if you want to get the most value from your people, making them feel included is really, really important. If people feel shut down, you're getting less value from them. So there's a business case here. And I make the business case because I think it's inarguable and it helps me achieve my goal of making the world better in the way I think is valuable.
Nice.
Inclusiveness, respect. Your baby is ugly is the last thing anyone ever hears you say because they're annoyed at you. Your design is ugly. Your software sucks. I can't believe you're running it as root. You shut people down. People made the decisions they made for reasons that seemed decent to them at the time, whatever they were. Okay, here's where we are. Let's be respectful. Let's be understanding, right? It's hard to get software to run. Coming in and saying, you need to rewrite all of this in, I don't know, Rust. Rust turns out to be a great language and it's hard to learn. Telling people they've got to do that, you lose things. And so the values of inclusivity, of respect and compassion, I think help people help their organizations in very important ways. So those are the values I work on.
Nice. Okay, we get to the last short batch. So people, if you're listening and you have questions, be ready to jump into the chat. When should threat modeling happen? What's your best threat modeling strategy? You got 30 seconds.
Sorry, go ahead.
You got 30 seconds to go.
Threat model every story.
Thank you.
No, seriously, threat modeling should have, and let me break this out just a little bit. a lot of people think about threat modeling as this big heavyweight thing that has to happen in its own sprint or something. Asking the 4 questions is threat modeling. I have a white paper entitled Fast, Cheap, and Good, which advocates for these incredibly lightweight approaches to threat modeling, such as saying, what's your worst nightmare? What keeps you up at night? This gets results really, really quickly. And so we can ask these questions on an ongoing, thank you for sharing that, on an ongoing basis. And so the strategy is to infuse it into the way the organization develops stuff. So, I'm lucky. I work with people who develop spaceships. They're very waterfally. We do a very waterfally sort of threat model. I work with other people who are in the club who deploy 1,000 times a day. We are very agile. And so my strategy is to not change the way they're doing the work, right? The organization has learned to do anything from putting new PHP files on a web server, new React files on a phone, to respecting client confidentiality here, putting spacecraft in space. I'm not going to tell them to change that any more than I absolutely need to, because if we go back to the whole point about, is it going to click? If we go back to the whole point about Star Trek, the more I need to change for them, the less likely I am to be successful, the more likely it is to be randomized, the message to be confused. And the parts which don't matter might rise to the surface and overwhelm the parts that do. If I said, for example, I want you to threat model and I want you to use PyTM, and they're shipping Java, not Python, all of a sudden they have to figure out, am I going to use PyPy or am I going to use PyEnv? Or, every time I go to install something in Python, it's like crazy making because I don't spend my life doing it. I don't want that problem to overwhelm people's ability to threat model. And so if I say, yeah, and learn Python, I've just lost. And I've lost for no reason. So that's my strategy, is adhere closely to what they do.
So minimize friction, embed into existing process, and respect those processes.
Yes.
Awesome stuff. Oh, that was the last one, actually. So if anybody has any questions, that would be a great time.
So at the beginning, and if people have questions, please pop them in there. But at the beginning, Dennis was asking about scalability.
Right.
And we haven't explicitly talked about scalability, but we have talked about scalability. So let's do it explicitly.
The resources here for people while you speak. Yeah, go.
Thank you. Sorry, just had a brain fade.
my bad. Scalability.
Scalability. So I will come to Richard's question in just a second, but the key to scalability is to make sure that you are asking as little as possible and as much as you need in that question about who delivers what to whom. I appreciate all of the lovely things people say about my threat modeling book. And I am super aware that it is 624 pages. Yours is shorter. Yours is much shorter. It's great.
Exactly because yours is so long. I needed something that people could read in a weekend.
Yeah, fair that. But people get the impression that because the book is long, threat modeling needs to be complex. Mm. And the issue is that threat modeling is like programming. There are different editors, there are different methodologies, there are different languages, there are debugging techniques, there are deployment scenarios. And I tried to cover all of them in meaningful ways in my book. When I train, I have the 4 questions. They sit on a wallet card. The wallet card is not in focus here. It's probably because my face. Can you see that?
Yeah, this is not the card we're looking for. Oh, no, yeah.
All right. So everything you need to know fits on a wallet card. And so the trick is to not overcomplicate it. And that helps you scale. And so the difference, to Richard's question here, between 50 developers and 500 developers is you can put 50 developers in a room and have it feel like a conversation, not a lecture.
Right.
And that changes everything about how you deal with a team of 50 versus a team of 500, right? I can be conversational. My support mechanisms can be less formal. My training mechanisms may be more in depth, or they may be lighter weight. Actually, so that's not really a difference between, at 500, your training methods are probably going to be lighter weight, because even an hour of 500 people's time is a lot of time. And so you're less likely to spend a day training each of those 500 people, right? That's 2-person years, give or take. So the next question is about trust boundaries and zero trust. And trust boundaries are not disappearing. Trust boundaries are getting enforced in a zero trust world, right? The zero trust is in a sense an answer to why weren't we doing anything to authenticate people, to address the threat of spoofing. And so we're trying to do that. And depending on what your elements are, right? If your element is, this is the box running the SQL database, and this is the box running the web front end, and this is the box running the WAF, yep, there's a boundary between them. If your elements are more like Unix processes, all running as user Izar, then you might not need to, or you might want to, right? You might want to actually isolate those. And here, I think QMail is a really useful example of how to build a program with least authority or least privilege, that we put these boundaries between these processes, and that isolation, that limit on the impact of a problem helps us develop more secure systems, requires attackers to pop through more things, makes each of those layers more difficult. So Matthew's question here about standardization. Let me actually break this into 2 questions. The first is standardization of threat documentation, and the second is doing it as code. Again, like the difference between spacecraft and websites, I think our threat model documents should be as standard as all the other software documents that we have. Some people use user stories. Some people use sagas. Some people use market requirement documents and product definition documents. The idea that there's going to be one single form that works for every project, I think distracts us from specialization. I love the explosion of threat models as code, I love the idea that you're 100% right. Representing these things as compilable objects, as parsable objects that can be static analyzed, that can be validated, and we can do things with them as software objects is amazing. It's super powerful in terms of scaling and measurement across an organization. And we're going, if you use YAML in your project already, go for it. And if instead, I'm sorry, you're using some sort of Java object notation, use that, right? There's no, I see so much variation between the folks that I'm helping that my answer is always, what works for you today and what's the thing that is closest to that we can use tomorrow.
I'll just drop a bit here about the Open Threat Model standard and 3 Agile, and of course PyTM.
Yep. Yeah, and thank you to our sponsors, Arius Risk, and our other sponsors here today. But I am reminded of Arius because Izar just dropped a link in the chat to their Open Threat Model standard. I love it. It's cool work. I actually met Fraser, I think for the first time at an Open Security Summit while they were being held in person in like 2017, 2018. Fraser, by the way, is the driver behind the Open Threat Model standard. I should say that.
Any other questions? Anything that needs clarification? Anything AppSec related? Doesn't have to be threat modeling only.
So let me just close out by saying thank you to those of you who joined us live today. And for everybody joining us live, watching video later, the thing that I really want to emphasize is that threat modeling does not have to be difficult or challenging. Training can help, but you don't need training. What you need to do is ask the 4 questions. What are we working on right now? Sometimes people put, and I'm going to rabbit hole myself for a second. Sometimes people express this as, what are we building? That gets you very waterfally answers. What are we working on gets you, what are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? Did we do a good job? Each of these structures can help you be more consistent, predictable, reliable, systematic. But if you just go and start asking those 4 questions, you're going to actually find value in it. And then you can, then you can get deeper as you need to. So being really agile, minimum viable threat model is 4 questions. So I encourage you to go apply them to a project you're working on tomorrow when you start working, right? It's late in the day in the UK, so I'm not going to say right now, but give it a shot tomorrow. Let me know what happens.
All right, so we are at time, I think. Adam, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was, as usual, instructive and fun. And everybody here, keep an eye on the next one. We are going to have another interesting person to answer our questions.
All right. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Bye.